I let my ex tattoo his initials over my chest. My husband saw it during a family vacation. Hi, I'm Lily. I'm 27 years old. And my husband accidentally saw my ex's initials on my chest. The thing is, life for me has always been about having fun and daring to experience everything and jumping through all the hurdles life throws my way. But to be honest, this one is way too high to jump over and far too unbearable for me to handle. Nothing's fun anymore, and the worst part of it all is that I don't know how to change what I did. I have no idea how to right my wrongs. I think things started to take a wrong turn for me after my breakup with Joseph, my ex. I've had a lot of boyfriends since I've always liked to go with the flow, but Joseph was different. He was the one who stuck, and we had been together for quite a while. Unlike the others, we didn't last, and eventually went our separate ways. I must admit, breaking up with him did hit me like a train in the rain. And you know how they say that time heals all wounds? Well, I don't believe that. I'm more of a make new memories to forget old ones type of girl. So just like I did with my other exes, I hopped onto the next ride that came my way, and that's how I met Bernie. I let myself fall head over heels. I let myself collapse into him. Our relationship moved very fast. I started dating him just 2 weeks after my breakup with Joseph. And as if our start wasn't fast enough, we got married 6 months later. Just like every other couple, we were so in love. And that was it. I thought I had met the one for me, and I had finally arrived at the finish line, but I guess life had other plans. A few months after Bernie and I said our vows, it felt like things started to get boring between us. I no longer felt that spark and excitement I had when we were still in our dating stage. It felt like things became more formal, and I had to change and act a certain way just because my title had changed from girlfriend to wife. I was no longer allowed to dress the way I usually did. I couldn't go out the way I wanted, and worse, Bernie wouldn't let me work. He gave me everything. I didn't have to think twice about what I wanted. He would get it for me. If there were a way someone could buy the moon, Bernie would have done it, because he was willing to give me anything and everything just to make me comfortable. He said I didn't have to work because he didn't want me going through any stress. He was most of the time busy with his company affairs, but he had never made me feel like he wasn't there. He'd call me 3 times a day to be sure I was okay, and he'd try his best to return to my side just to spend the remaining hours of the day with me, despite how exhausted he was. On weekends, he'd cancel everything related to work and would spend all the time with me, but that too wasn't going as planned because every weekend ended with me getting lectured by Bernie's mom. She would always stop by with Bernie's siblings, and a simple dinner would turn into a lecture about how to make a good dish or what I should be doing, so I'd get pregnant soon and give her grandkids. It would be a long, draining lecture, and each time I complained, Bernie would always ask me to be more patient and understanding, saying that my mother-in-law was only looking out for me and that she cared about me. The routine would always continue, and no matter how much Bernie tried to give me everything and anything, I still felt empty, and it was always like something was missing. I was barely hanging on by a thread when a meeting with someone I shouldn't have met sent me crashing into this never-ending chaos I'm in. It was my mother's birthday, and she had invited me and Bernie over for dinner. Bernie was still at work, so I had to leave first so he could join later. On my way to my mom's place, I bumped into Joseph, my ex. My car had broken down on the way over, and that's when I first got the hint that life was playing games with me because of all the people who drove down that road. It just had to be my ex. Seeing him again wasn't exactly great, but it didn't feel bad either. He offered to give me a ride on his bike, and at first I was hesitant. After giving it much thought, I agreed because he was the first vehicle that had passed me in the 20-plus minutes I had been waiting. I had called Bernie a couple of times, and he wasn't taking his calls. That was unlike him. I didn't want to risk waiting any longer, because it was already getting dark, and I needed to be home soon. I swear I had no other intentions, and only accepted his offer so I could get home, but that was the beginning of my problems, I guess. He dropped me off at my mom's place, and that should have been the end of everything, but sadly it wasn't. After Joseph left, my brother went to get a repairman and pick up my car while I went in to see my mother. Before I could pretend I never met Joseph, my mom brought it up first. She had seen Joseph dropping me off and had once again started complaining about Joseph. Back when Joseph and I were together, she had never liked him. Everyone saw Joseph as a bad influence on me. and they were happy when we broke up. He was a tattoo artist in a biker gang, and my whole family saw him as someone who wasn't suitable for me. He drew my first and only tattoo, a bracelet around my wrist, and my parents were livid about that. My mom scolded me, saying I was married and that letting Joseph into my life again was surely trouble. I should have taken her word, but I waved it off, telling her nothing was going on and it was all a coincidence. I told everyone that he just helped me when I was stranded, and that was it. I wasn't lying because that was the first time we had seen each other after our breakup, and I should have kept to my word and made sure Joseph and I never crossed paths again for any reason, but I failed to. Bernie arrived later and joined us for dinner. He apologized 100 times for not being there to help me earlier, and when he asked how I had sorted everything out, my brother was just about to bring Joseph up, but my mom and I cut him off. We changed the topic by saying my brother had picked me up and that he had sent my car over for repair. The rest of the evening went well, and my mom had insisted we spend the night. Bernie agreed because there was no harm in doing so. My mom had my old room prepared for Bernie and me, but the moment I walked in, I knew for sure that I had made the wrong choice by accepting to stay over. Aside from the fact that, even while at dinner with Bernie, Joseph kept crossing my mind, and I had shoved it off, calling it a maybe normal occurrence since we hadn't seen each other in so long. But after entering my old room, I started remembering Joseph and me. Back then, we were so adventurous and full of fun, and most times Joseph would sneak into my room at night. We'd be together the whole night and then go through a lot of drama the next morning just so he could sneak back out without getting caught. One night we got caught, and my mom almost brought the whole house down on us. I ran out with Joseph that night and came home the next day because I was afraid of what my mom would do to me. I was so lost in those thoughts that I didn't realize Bernie had been calling me. When I came back to my senses, I was smiling like an idiot, and Bernie noticed and asked what was on my mind that made me so happy. I was caught off guard by the question. How was I supposed to start explaining that I'd been thinking about my ex all evening, and that being back in my old room made me feel like I was back in time with him again? I couldn't admit that to Bernie, so I pretended, saying I was smiling because of the old picture beside him. My excuse worked, as he started smiling too when the picture caught his attention, and just like that, we started having random chats, and it felt like I could finally escape the past. But no, it even got worse. I was showering, and Bernie joined me. It was something we did most of the time, but this time I kept seeing flashes of Joseph, as we had done that a couple of times in the same space. I was startled at first, and Bernie asked if I was okay. He looked worried, and that made me feel even more guilty. I needed to get my head straight, so I told him I was fine. I pulled him closer, and I kissed him, and we made love. I needed him at that moment because I wanted to break free from whatever had gotten me tangled up with Joseph. And for a moment I thought it worked, until someone up there decided to test me again. Bernie had to leave early for an important business meeting, and I had to return home by myself again. He had asked his driver to wait behind and take me home, but I had refused, saying my brother was going to take me home later, and I still needed to spend a little more time with my mom. I had watched Bernie's car leave, and that was how I caught sight of Joseph at the side of the road with his bike, just a few steps or more away from my mom's place. I could tell it was him because of his bike and his unique dressing style. I was going to pretend like I hadn't noticed him, but our eyes clicked for a second and he waved at me. I immediately forgot I had decided to spend more time with my mom and quickly rushed back inside, gathered my stuff, made up a random excuse, and left. I had decided to meet with him one last time and settle whatever I thought we had, and also make it clear to him that I didn't want us meeting ever again. With my mind made up and a long list of words in my head, I got the car keys from my brother, telling him I would leave on my own. He had a fat mouth, and I couldn't risk him seeing Joseph and me together. I got into the car and drove out without raising suspicion, and a few seconds after my car drove past Joseph, I noticed from the side mirror that he had gotten on his bike and was following me. I stopped by a random cafe I saw along the road and got out waiting for Joseph. He soon arrived, and after taking off his helmet, he walked up to me with an innocent smile on his face, as if he hadn't done what he did on purpose. I was about to start with the speech I had prepared to say to him when he said he missed me and couldn't help himself ever since he saw me again the previous night, and that's why, even though he didn't want to, he found himself waiting outside my house just to get a glimpse of my face. Hearing those words melted something in me. I was happy deep down to know that I wasn't the only one who felt that way, and that the feeling between us was mutual. I had barely rearranged my response to him when he said he wasn't expecting me to come to him, but he was happy I did. The smile that followed was just enough to forget he was my ex and that I had a husband. We had breakfast together, talked like old friends, and he asked for my new number, and I gave it to him. That was my second mistake. We had gone for a ride together just like old times, and just like that, I was shamelessly having a blast with my ex. If I'm being honest, I didn't want that moment to end, but I had no choice but to return, as I knew Bernie would be looking for me already. I had left my phone in my car, and just as I had feared, I came back to find a lot of missed calls from Bernie. I didn't call him back. I just went home, and I met him waiting outside for me. He looked worried, as if something bad had happened to me. He didn't even let me get out of the car and immediately rushed over to check if I was hurt. I told him I was fine and that he was overreacting, but he got pissed and yelled at me for being the reason he was acting that way. He asked why I wasn't taking my calls and where I had been the whole day, and I told him I went over to my friend's place and that I was sorry I got too caught up and missed his calls. Bernie didn't ask more questions and held me inside while he asked one of the house staff to get my stuff. I had escaped getting caught that night, and I couldn't stop praising myself for being so smart. After that night, Joseph and I got closer. It started with only chatting and slowly progressed until it got to a point I couldn't control myself anymore. We started meeting more often, especially when Bernie was at work. I knew my husband's schedule like the lines on my palm, so I could easily be with Joseph while keeping him out of Bernie's sight. Joseph and I kept talking. He'd send me pictures of his adventures, mountain climbing, partying, and so on. Soon he started sending me pictures of the tattoos he had drawn for clients. They were beautiful. He asked me to come over to his shop, and I agreed. My third mistake. That day, Bernie's mom and I were supposed to go shopping for Bernie's sister's kids, and I had backed out, claiming I was feeling sick and couldn't leave the house. My mother-in-law immediately agreed, saying I should rest because I might be experiencing morning sickness. She suggested I see a doctor soon to know if I was expecting. I was going to talk her out of the idea, but that would mean more lectures on how to make it happen, and I wasn't ready for that. She had mentioned she was going to speak to Bernie to take me to see a doctor, but I had told her I would go alone, and if truly I was pregnant, I wanted it to come as a surprise to Bernie. She had complimented me for being so sweet and thoughtful. If only she knew my real plan, she would have made toast out of me that day. After sorting things out with my mother-in-law and making sure it was safe to leave, I hurried over to Joseph's shop. He offered me a drink, we talked, and that was all. But when I was about to go, he put my coat on my back and tried to give me a peck on my cheek, but I moved my head and made him kiss my lips. I still don't know why I did that, but it happened. I would say that was my fourth mistake, but it wasn't a mistake. It felt too good to be a mistake. I had butterflies I hadn't felt in a long while, and I couldn't stop myself from blushing. Joseph was shocked, and he wouldn't stop staring at me. I was shocked at myself, too, for actually doing that, and Joseph's fixed stare made me feel so hot that I left immediately. But after that day, I guess I had given him permission to be bold because he became a lot bolder. He'd ask to meet up in a bar to hang out with friends, and he'd introduce me as his girl. He'd call anytime he wanted, and I'd always find myself waiting for his calls when he didn't. Slowly, I got comfortable, and we were both having our time like it was normal. My relationship with Joseph was so different. It was wild and pure chaos, and I had just realized how much I had missed being with him. I started spending more time with him while he worked at his tattoo shop, and when he had no customers, we'd spend the time together committing one sin after another. He'd kiss me in his tattoo shop, grab my ass, and we'd have quickies on the furniture that customers sat on for their tattoos. I was shamelessly living a double life. This wild biker girl with Joseph, and the loving, perfect bread-baking wife with Bernie. Once, while I was hanging out with Joseph, he said he wanted to show me something. It was 2 drawings on a piece of paper, and they were beautiful. One was made with his initials, JC, Joseph Cobbs, and the other with my initials, LJ, Lily Jones. He said he'd drawn them for us and that he wanted to tattoo his initials on me, and mine on him, to mark our love. I laughed at the idea and told him that I'd like to, but it was too dangerous. That was me being smart and careful, and maybe I would have been able to keep lying and cheating on Bernie. But as they say, no secrets can be hidden forever, and they'd always find a way to see the light of day. I went home, and while I was in my husband's arms watching TV, I shouted at a character in the show to do something dangerous because it needed to be done for him and his friends to survive. My husband said that not everyone could take high risks, adding that someone like me would fold under the same circumstances. That sounded like a dare to me, and somehow I wanted to prove him wrong. I could also take risky decisions if I wanted to, and just like that, I decided to do something bold to prove him wrong. I went to bed, and the next day I went to Joseph's shop angrily and asked him to tattoo my initials on me. I was going to show it to Bernie and brag that I wasn't scared anymore, even if his mother scolded me. It was just a way to prove that I, too, could be bold if I wanted to. But my stupid idea failed when Joseph insisted I tattoo his initials instead. He claimed I had refused to have a tattoo when he first brought it up, and had suddenly returned to have one just because of a bet I made with my husband. He was pouty and looking all jealous, and I couldn't help but find it cute. I quickly shoved away my original plan and agreed to have his initials tattooed so he would be happy and stop being jealous. He originally wanted to draw it on my arm or shoulder, but I told him to draw it on my chest, between my breasts. He asked if I was sure, and I confirmed. He drew it, and it was even more beautiful than I had imagined. It looked like the art was cupping my breasts. The J cupped my left breast, and the C cupped my right, but they were joined in the middle by a beautiful flowery butterfly. One wouldn't even notice they were initials unless I let my breasts loose. When I went home, my husband didn't see it for a few days. We didn't shower together during that time, and we made love twice, but I had my shirt on. I wasn't trying to hide it or anything. I just wanted him to find it naturally. Although I was really praying he didn't think tattoos were a big deal. He had never complained about the one on my wrist, but I had to take it off when we got married because of my mother-in-law. Things were still in place, and I hadn't been caught by Bernie yet, until our last family vacation. We'd been planning it for a while, and Bernie had decided to take both our families with us since we would be there until Christmas Eve. We basically took over a small motel in the city we visited. It was all lovely. Sadly, I didn't tell Joseph about the trip, so he kept texting me, and I couldn't reply because I was with my family. The first night of the trip was fun. The second followed, and the third night, which was Christmas Eve, was a pool night, and I wore a bikini. That was when my husband first saw the tattoo, or at least the edges of it. To my surprise, he loved it. He thought I drew it to surprise him during the family vacation. That lit a fuse inside him, because he couldn't get his hands off me that night. He was so clingy in the pool that everyone started calling us the inseparable lovebirds. After dinner, when everyone had left for their rooms, Bernie took me to our room. The mood was right, and we were ready to make love. We were both so in the mood. But when he took off my bikini top, he paused as the tattoo became clearer. JC, he called the letters out softly like a kid trying to read. A second letter, as if a piece of the puzzle in his head finally clicked, he continued, and his next words were just enough to make my already wet hole dry up. Is that JC? He muttered. As in Joseph Cobbs, your ex? My heart started racing, and I slowly began to panic. I scolded myself silently for not dimming the lights more, or for even getting Joseph's initials in the first place and not mine. But it was too late. I decided to lie my way out as usual and also play dumb to his question. I asked him what he was talking about, but he got up and scolded me, telling me not to take him for a fool because he wasn't dumb. I realized it wasn't a simple joke anymore. Bernie was out for war. I tried to calm him down, telling him it wasn't what he thought, but Bernie wouldn't listen. He furiously asked why I had my ex's initials on me, and if I was still thinking about him. I told him I was sorry, and that I only did it to prove a point to him, that I could also be bold, and it was nothing but a useless joke. I promised to take it off the next day and apologized again, but Bernie wasn't satisfied. He barely spoke to me the whole night, and the next morning he left the motel. Our vacation still had 2 more days to go, but Bernie leaving had everyone confused, and they wouldn't stop asking me questions, each one a different version of the same thing. And no matter how many times they asked, I couldn't give them any answers, nor could I confess the truth to them. I left the motel the next day because I couldn't stand my mother-in-law's nagging, and I desperately needed to fix things with Bernie. But first, I needed to end things with Joseph. Things were now riskier because Bernie had seen the tattoo, and I didn't want anything to set him off about my affair with Joseph. At least I could fix that problem. He was only mad about the tattoo. I couldn't let things get worse by letting him find out that I hadn't just been drawing tattoos on my breasts. I had also been letting Joseph taste them. When I got to Joseph's shop, I told him I wanted us to end things because I was no longer having fun, and Bernie was getting suspicious too. Joseph was furious, and that idiot told me he'd never let me dump him again, for the second time. I asked him to break up with me if that was the case, as I didn't want to continue what we had going on anymore. I didn't want it to cost me my marriage. I didn't even finish negotiating with Joseph when I heard someone chuckle from behind us. I turned and saw Bernie standing there, watching us. At that moment, I felt as if my soul had left my body, leaving only my helpless flesh to face Bernie's rage. Bernie called us shameless and said that I was nothing but an idiot and a big embarrassment to him. I couldn't find my voice. I was too shocked to speak, let alone beg. What shocked me more was that Joseph looked scared, or maybe angry and disappointed. He asked Bernie how he found him, and Bernie responded that it wasn't difficult, as Joseph wasn't anything special or important. Bernie revealed that Joseph had approached me on purpose to use our affair to blackmail him and get money from him. I was stunned and speechless as I realized that what I had thought was love was, once again, nothing but lies. I couldn't believe I had let Joseph hurt and fool me for the second time. Bernie said he had refused to believe Joseph when he kept sending him spam messages about our affair and had chosen to trust me. But seeing the tattoos that night confirmed he had only been deceiving himself, and I wasn't the person he thought I was. He cursed at me, saying he regretted everything, that he never wanted to see me again, and that Joseph and I both deserved each other. He left me there, and that was it for me. I don't know how else to make amends, as Bernie wouldn't even give me the chance. Now Bernie acts like a totally different person. He barely acknowledges my presence at home, and I no longer knew his schedule, because he had become so unpredictable. Last night he finally came home, and I noticed he had a tattoo on his chest. It looked like initials, though I had no idea whose. I became restless and scared. I tried to ask him about it, but he just ignored me. He left this morning for a business trip, and I'm alone here, feeling restless, not knowing what to do anymore. Update. It's been weeks since Bernie left me at home and went on his business trip. He has still refused to talk to me. He doesn't respond to my calls or messages like before anymore, and I find myself losing my mind each time the tattoo I saw on him comes to mind. I keep getting wild thoughts as I begin to imagine that he might cheat on me too, just to get back at me. He froze all the accounts I had access to, leaving only my old personal account, which had barely enough to take care of me until, who knows when, he'd come back. I was already out of ways to fix my marriage, but the worst just had to happen to me. I had been experiencing morning sickness, and this time it was real. I wasn't faking it to avoid my mother-in-law or for any other reason. I decided to see a doctor, and that's when I found out I was pregnant. I was happy with the news at first, only to become a fool later as I realized I didn't know who the father of the baby might be. The thought of the child being Joseph's was already too terrifying to even think about, but I couldn't rule that out completely either. I had been sexually active with both my husband and Joseph, and I honestly had no idea who the father of the baby was. It would have been easier to claim the pregnancy was Bernie's before, but not now. Not now that he was fully aware of my infidelity, and I was barely a foot in his life, and 1 foot out. I spent the rest of the week calculating and thinking of a way out, but no matter how hard I thought or planned, there was no denying I was done for. I hadn't seen Joseph since our last confrontation, and he hadn't bothered to call me either. Not that I wanted anything to do with him, but because I was thinking ahead, just in case Bernie really ended up kicking me out of his life. I didn't want my child to be fatherless, as Joseph was also nowhere to be found. I would always pray and cry myself to sleep, wishing 1,000,000 times that Bernie would forgive me, accept me, and somehow a miracle would happen, and that the baby would turn out to be his, and we'd put everything behind us and start over as one big family. More days passed, and I became even more restless. I went over to my mother-in-law's place. I couldn't even remember the last time I'd gone there on my own accord, as I'd either been dragged there by Bernie or my sister-in-law. But my situation had become so unbearable that I decided to walk into the lioness's den myself. I was welcomed inside as usual, and it made me even more scared about what was to come. She came down to meet me, saying she was surprised to hear of my visit and that she had been planning to come over soon because she was starting to get worried. Bernie had been away for too long, which was really unlike him, as he wouldn't even bear to be away that long knowing I'd be home alone. That was when I realized she was still clueless about everything that had happened, and that Bernie hadn't disclosed my infidelity to her yet. She asked if everything was okay, and somehow I felt I needed to confess my mistake to her and ask for her help. But I was too scared. I told myself she'd never accept me, and if Bernie couldn't even forgive me, then his mother would be worse. Another idea came to mind, and I decided to use another means to save my marriage. I told her about my pregnancy and that Bernie and I were going to be parents. As expected, she was brimming with joy over the news and immediately called her family assistant to find Bernie wherever he was and bring him home immediately. She had the power to do that, but had been holding back to give us both space. But with the news of my pregnancy, she just couldn't sit back anymore. I tried to calm her down and tell her to let me surprise Bernie about it first, but that old lady wouldn't listen. She immediately arranged a big celebration after confirming Bernie had gotten on a plane and was on his way home. She called my family as well as hers and set up the biggest and fanciest dinner I had ever seen since I got married into Bernie's family. Seeing the excitement on everyone's faces made me feel even more guilty. I couldn't stop my tears when it forced their way out, and each time I got caught, everyone would all laugh and ask if I was that excited to be a mother. Nobody knew I was slowly dying inside, with no one to save me. Finally, my biggest moment came. Bernie walked in through the doors. His facial expression was clear evidence that he had been forced home. He looked confused by the arrangement and asked what the occasion was. I wanted to use that opportunity to speak to him first before the main dinner started, but my mother-in-law wouldn't let me move a toe, afraid I might trip, and asked me to remain seated, that they were going to handle everything. How on earth was she going to handle everything? I thought to myself. The dinner was meaningless to me, and all I could think about was imagining the different scenarios of what Bernie's expression and reaction would be when he got the news about my pregnancy, and truly, it wasn't any less than what I had imagined. In fact, it was worse. I tried a couple of times to get to Bernie, but it was just as difficult as trying to meet the president. My mother-in-law wouldn't even give me that space, and to make things worse, Bernie deliberately ignoring me made it even harder to get his attention. I was really on my own now. The hour for dinner came, and everyone started joining the set table one by one. I became even more restless and anxious, enough that my mother noticed. She asked if I was okay, and before I could even think of confiding in her, I was dragged to the table. It was too late to turn back. This wasn't what I wanted. I only wanted to use my mother-in-law as a means to bring Bernie back. I just needed a chance to talk to him, to beg him to take me back. But that old lady had taken that chance away from me, and now I just had to wait to see my end. We were only a few minutes into dinner when Bernie couldn't hold it in anymore and asked what was going on. I knew he was uncomfortable because of me. We sat opposite each other, and I couldn't stop trying to meet his eyes. I was desperately sending him SOS signals, but Bernie wouldn't even look at me. I couldn't swallow my food properly, and I doubted he was enjoying his either. After he asked the question, my mother-in-law and everyone else turned to me. It was as if they were all saying, "Go ahead, it's your moment now." My whole body started trembling, and I couldn't open my mouth. My mother-in-law's patience wore thin, and she instantly poured out the news that I was pregnant, that Bernie and I were finally going to be parents. She expressed her joy, saying she had always wanted a grandchild from Bernie, as that child would automatically be the next heir to the family business. She had barely finished congratulating us when Bernie shattered everyone's joy with his response by asking if he was the father, in a tone that meant, "Dare me and say yes." I wasn't surprised. I had been expecting that. But the others in the room hadn't. Everyone went silent, their eyes darting between Bernie and me. I had prepared myself for that moment, but when it came, I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I just sat there, glued to my seat, paralyzed with fear. Bernie looked me dead in the eyes, and his voice louder now and more rageful. He suddenly scooped up the plates in front of him and sent them crashing to the floor, shouting, asking who I thought I was to decide he was the father of the child I was carrying. He couldn't hold it in any longer. He laid it all out, my affair with Joseph, for everyone to hear. Then he cursed me for having the audacity to think I could pin a bastard's child on him. My mother-in-law couldn't just watch anymore. She demanded to know what was going on. Bernie turned to her, scolding her for even considering naming my child the next heir to his name and business. He said he wanted nothing more to do with me. He said he'd even drawn a temporary tattoo with random initials just to hurt me, to make me regret, but that while he'd been waiting and trying to heal, I had gone ahead and tried to trick my way back into his life. Then he turned back to me and asked if I really thought telling his mom about my pregnancy would make him forgive me and take me back. That's when I realized he had gotten it all wrong. I never wanted to use my pregnancy to buy my way back into his life. I just didn't have any other way to reach him, and this was the only chance I saw. Things had gotten out of hand, and that was never my intention. I wanted to explain that to him, but he didn't even let me speak. He just told me to get out of his life. My whole family sat there, ashamed, unable to look Bernie or his family in the eye. One by one, they slowly got up and left, leaving only my mother and me in the room with Bernie's family. Bernie's mother took over from him then, cursing me, tearing me apart with her words. I couldn't talk back. All I could do was cry and apologize, over and over. Bernie finally stormed upstairs, and his mother ordered for me and my mother to be dragged out of her house. I screamed for Bernie to help me, to forgive me, but it was like screaming underwater. No one heard me. No one cared. I was kicked out, and my belongings followed the next day. Now I'm staying at my mom's house, in the old room I once thought was special. It doesn't feel that way anymore. The four walls of my room feel like a cell I'm trapped in, with no hope of escape. The minute Bernie sent my things over, I knew it was the end. It's painful, and I can't accept it, but I have no one to blame but myself. What scares me even more is the thought of bringing my child into this chaos. I keep debating having an abortion, but something in me still hopes and fears that it's Bernie's child. People might judge me for trying to use the child to get him back, but honestly, I wanted things to go back to normal. I just wanted to make amends. But I'm scared too. What if my child grows up to hate me? What if he's ashamed of me? Or worse, what if it turns out to be Joseph's? I'm lost. I don't know what my next step should be. Bernie's mom finally sent me the divorce papers. I don't even know what to do or say anymore. All I ask every day is my life really over? Is this where it all ends for me?